I stood outside the front door, my hand gripping the cool metal of my badge, trying to remind myself that this was home, not another crime scene. After a brutal 48-hour shift, all I wanted was the comfort of my wife, Kate. The cases, the arrests, the late nights, they all blurred together, but walking through this door was supposed to ground me again. It always had. But something fell off the second I stepped onto the porch. Kate's car was in its usual spot, but there was an unfamiliar SUV parked across the street. It wasn't odd for our neighborhood, but today it stuck out, made my stomach churn. Still, I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. I slid my key into the lock, hoping to surprise her. As I pushed the door open, the stillness inside hit me like a punch to the gut. It was too quiet. No soft music playing in the background. No distant sound of Kate on a call with her sister. Just silence. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. My pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. I moved toward the stairs, keeping my steps light. Halfway up, I heard it. Her voice, unmistakable, coming from the bedroom. And then, a man's. My chest tightened. My throat went dry. I paused, gripping the banister as I forced myself to take a breath. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overreacting. But then her laugh floated down the stairs. Light, playful, the kind of laugh she used to save for me. The laugh I hadn't heard in months. I moved closer, step by step, trying to keep my emotions in check. As I neared the top, the voices became clearer. The tone between them, it was intimate. Too intimate. I swallowed hard, refusing to believe what my gut was screaming at me. I stopped at the bedroom door, which was cracked open just enough for me to see. And there she was, Kate, my wife, tangled in the sheets, her head resting on the chest of a man I didn't recognize. She was smiling, laughing even, like she didn't have a care in the world. Her hand rested on his bare chest, and he looked like he belonged there. My vision blurred, rage swelling inside me, threatening to boil over. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, rip the guy out of my bed. But I couldn't move. I stood there, frozen in place, watching the life I thought I knew fall apart in front of me. The surprise dinner I had planned, the weekend getaway I'd been saving up for. It all seemed like a joke now. A cruel joke. How long had this been going on? Had she brought him here while I was out on the streets, catching criminals, thinking I was keeping our world safe? I swallowed the lump in my throat and backed away, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I needed to think, to figure out my next move. I slipped quietly back down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, like I was sinking into the ground with every moment that passed. In the kitchen, I collapsed into a chair, staring at the tickets I'd tucked into my jacket pocket. A surprise anniversary trip to the coast. I pulled them out, staring blankly at the paper, the weight of my reality crashing down around me. Kate had been my world. I'd sacrificed so much, given everything to this marriage. And now this. I clenched my fists, feeling the crumple of the tickets beneath my fingers. I thought of the late nights, the missed dinners, the moments where I could have sworn something was off but never pressed. I had blamed the distance on my job, on the stress. But it was him. All this time, it was him. Revenge came to me in that moment. Not some explosive confrontation. No, I was smarter than that. If there was one thing the job had taught me, it was patience. I wouldn't let them see me broken. I wouldn't let them win. I stared at my phone, ideas churning in my mind. If I could catch the worst criminals in the city, I could catch her too. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Revenge would be sweet. I sat in the kitchen for what felt like hours, the world outside moving on without me while I was trapped in a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and deep, aching sadness. The anniversary trip I had planned, the dinner I had pictured us sharing tonight. It all seemed laughable now. How could I have been so blind? The signs were there, subtle but present. If only I had paid attention. I clenched the tickets tighter in my hand, the paper crinkling under the force of my grip. The laugh I had heard upstairs still echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of how far she had drifted from me. But this wasn't just about Kate's infidelity. It was about betrayal, about how, while I was out there risking my life, she was here, betraying the trust we had built over 8 years of marriage. That sting hit deeper than any wound I'd ever taken on the job. But as the initial wave of rage and devastation began to subside, something else started to rise in me. It wasn't just anger. It was cold, calculated resolve. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to confront her in a fit of emotion and give her the satisfaction of seeing me destroyed. No, this would be different. If Kate wanted to play games, I could play too, but on my terms. I knew I needed to approach this with a clear head. After all, I had dealt with far more complicated criminals than this. Kate wasn't smarter than the people I chased down in the streets every day. She wasn't more cunning than the drug dealers, the murderers, the con artists I had outwitted time and time again. She was just someone who had betrayed me, and if there was one thing I knew how to handle, it was betrayal. My mind raced with plans, each one more detailed than the last. I wasn't going to ruin her in one dramatic showdown. That would be too easy, too short-lived. No, I would make her feel what I was feeling. I would make her doubt, make her question everything, just like I was now. And then, when the time was right, I'd reveal the truth in a way that would leave her life in pieces. But first, I needed information. If this affair had been going on for months, there would be proof. Texts, emails, maybe even hidden meetups that I could track. I had the skills, the tools, and now the motivation. Kate wasn't the only one who could play this game. I'd collect every bit of evidence I could, and when I was ready, I'd tear her world apart. I stood up from the table, finally feeling some control over the situation. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at it. Nothing important, just a work message. But it reminded me of what I needed to do next. I had contacts, people who owed me favors, private investigators, tech guys who could get into places I couldn't. I didn't need to do this alone. But before I made any calls, I needed to check something. I headed back upstairs, pausing outside the bedroom door. It was quiet now, the man, whoever he was, had likely left. The door was still ajar. I pushed it open slowly, half expecting to see Kate still lying in bed, but she wasn't there. The sheets were rumpled, evidence of their time together, and my gut churned at the sight. I had to push the emotion down. Focus, James. The bedroom was our sanctuary once, a place where we shared everything. Our secrets, our dreams, our bodies. Now, it felt foreign, tainted. I ignored the mess on the bed and went straight to her side of the room, where she kept her phone and laptop. If she was careless, there might be something there. Something I could use to begin unraveling this web of lies. Her phone was on the nightstand, locked of course, but that didn't worry me. I knew the passcode. It was the same one she had always used, the one we had shared for our devices since we trusted each other completely. That thought alone nearly made me laugh now. Trust. What a joke. I unlocked the phone, my hands surprisingly steady for what I was about to do. The first thing I checked was her texts. There were the usual conversations, her sister, friends, work colleagues, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then I saw it. A message thread with someone saved simply as J. I opened it, my pulse quickening. The last message was from him. Can't wait to see you again. Today was amazing. My stomach twisted, but I kept reading. The messages went back weeks, months even. Some were innocent enough, making plans, talking about work. But then they became more explicit. There were confessions of love, promises of secret rendezvous, jokes about how they were getting away with it. It made me sick. I scrolled through the photos they had shared, pictures of them together in places I didn't recognize, intimate selfies taken in what was clearly our bedroom. I had been out there, risking my life on the streets, and she had been bringing him here, into my home, into our bed. But as much as it hurt, I knew this was just the beginning. I needed more. There was no point confronting her now. I wasn't ready, and I didn't have everything I needed. I had to play this smart. I slipped the phone back onto the nightstand and turned to her laptop. This, too, was password protected, but I knew her well enough to crack it. Once inside, I searched through her emails, her social media. There were more messages from Jay, confirmations of hotel bookings, flights she had taken that I thought were work-related. It was all there, every piece of evidence I needed to confirm what I already knew. Kate had been living a double life. I copied everything onto a flash drive, tucking it into my pocket. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. This was about control. I needed to know everything about her and this man, every detail that could help me tear her world apart. Once I had what I needed, I left the house, driving aimlessly for a while to clear my head. The flash drive burned a hole in my pocket as I thought about what to do next. It would be easy to call her out right now, to storm back into that house and confront her with all the evidence. But that wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't satisfy the cold, calculated anger that was building inside me. No, I wanted to make her suffer. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done, to live in fear and doubt before I took everything from her. The next few days were a blur of routine, work, and careful planning. At the precinct, I was the same old James, calm, collected, dependable. No one suspected a thing. But at home, I was setting the stage for what would come next. I began to pull away from Kate, slowly, subtly. I didn't confront her or change my behavior dramatically. Instead, I made excuses, longer hours at work, extra shifts, meetings that didn't really exist. I needed to create space, to give her the false sense of security that everything was fine. All the while, I was digging deeper, collecting more evidence, planning how I would destroy her life piece by piece. I reached out to a few trusted contacts, friends in law enforcement who had access to resources I could use. One of them was a private investigator I had worked with on a few cases. He was discreet, thorough, and owed me a favor. I filled him in on what I needed: surveillance, tracking, a deeper dive into Kate's new lover. His name was Jason. I learned from the investigator, a finance executive at some fancy firm downtown. He was everything I wasn't: polished, smooth-talking, with no idea of the life I led, the risks I took. The investigator pulled his records, employment history, financials, even details about his personal life. He was married, too, with a family. That gave me an idea. The more I learned about Jason, the more I began to craft my plan. He was just as much a part of this betrayal as Kate was, and I wasn't going to let him off easily either. If he thought he could sneak around and ruin my marriage without consequences, he was wrong. I'd make sure his life crumbled too, but it had to be done carefully. I needed to protect myself, to make sure I came out of this clean. Kate, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware. She carried on as if nothing had changed, thinking she was getting away with her affair. I let her believe it, acting the part of the distant husband too, focused on his job to notice what was happening right under his nose. But inside, I was calculating every move, setting everything into motion. It wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. It was about destroying the foundation of lies she had built and making sure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. And when I was done, when she had nothing left, I would walk away without a second thought. I didn't have to wait long for the opportunity to put my plan into action. It was a Friday night when I saw my chance. Kate thought I was working late again. Another long shift that would keep me away until the early hours of the morning. She had planned to meet Jason, and I knew exactly where they were going, thanks to the tracking software I'd installed on her phone weeks ago. I followed them to the hotel, parking a block away and watching from a distance as they checked in. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I had already tipped off Jason's wife, anonymously of course. I'd sent her the photos, the emails, everything I had gathered about their affair. I knew she would show up. It was only a matter of time. I waited in the lobby, blending in with the crowd, watching as Kate and Jason headed up to their room. They had no idea I was there. No idea that everything was about to unravel. About an hour later, Jason's wife stormed into the lobby, her face pale with shock and anger. I stayed in the background, watching as she demanded the room number from the front desk. I didn't intervene. I didn't need to. She was about to do the dirty work for me. I followed her up the stairs, keeping my distance, listening as she banged on the door. There was a brief moment of confusion, then shouting. I could hear Kate's voice, pleading, Jason trying to calm his wife down. But it was too late. The damage had been done. I didn't stick around to see the aftermath. I didn't need to. As I walked back to my car, a sense of cold satisfaction settled over me. This was just the beginning. As I walked away from the hotel, a sense of satisfaction crept over me, but it wasn't the explosive kind. It was cold, controlled, and strangely calm. There was no yelling, no screaming match, no dramatic confrontation. I had played it all out in my head so many times, imagining the anger, the accusations. But this was different. This was better. Because Kate and Jason had no idea that I was behind it, pulling the strings. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, letting the reality of what I'd just set in motion settle over me. This was only the first step, and it was already working out better than I could have hoped. Jason's wife had looked devastated, shocked. She'd learned soon enough that the man she thought she knew had been sneaking around behind her back, just like I had learned about Kate. And when she did, she would tear his life apart, probably more brutally than I ever could. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to get my hands dirty. The engine hummed to life, and I drove back home, my mind buzzing with possibilities. Jason's life was about to crumble, and Kate's was next. I knew that when Jason's wife confronted him, things would spiral out of control for both of them. And I wasn't done yet. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. I let myself in quietly, feeling a strange sense of detachment from everything. The house, the life I had once shared with Kate. She was still out, probably staying with Jason for the night, thinking she was safe from any consequences. But that's what made this all so satisfying. She didn't know that I was already 10 steps ahead of her. I went upstairs to our bedroom, pausing at the door. The room felt foreign now, tainted. I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping in the same bed where she had been with him. I grabbed a blanket and pillow, setting up on the couch downstairs instead. There would be time to deal with everything later. For now, I needed to rest, to prepare for what was coming next. The next morning, I woke up early, the cold light of dawn streaming through the windows. I was up before Kate returned home. I had expected that. She wouldn't have the nerve to come back until she thought everything had blown over. I spent the morning going over everything I had collected, the texts, the emails, the photos. I made sure it was all backed up and organized, ready for the next phase of my plan. By the time Kate finally walked through the door, it was well past noon. I heard her keys jingle as she came inside, her footsteps tentative as if she was unsure of what to expect. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in my phone. "Hey," she said softly as she walked in, glancing at me like she wasn't sure if I'd noticed how late she was getting home. I didn't look up. "Hey." She hovered in the doorway for a moment, clearly waiting for me to ask her where she had been. But I didn't. I let the silence stretch out between us until it became uncomfortable. Finally, she shifted awkwardly and moved toward the stairs. "I'm just going to take a shower," she mumbled, and disappeared up the steps. I stared at the door she'd left ajar, the same door I had stood outside of the night before, hearing her laugh with another man. It took everything in me not to follow her up there and confront her, not to demand answers. But I kept my cool. She was expecting a reaction, maybe even wanted one, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I continued with my day like nothing was wrong. I went to the gym, grabbed groceries, came back home. When I returned, Kate was acting normal, as if nothing had changed between us. She smiled at me, asked me about my day, even suggested we have dinner together later. I agreed, playing the part of the oblivious husband, while inside, I was planning my next move. The days that followed were an exercise in patience. Kate went about her life, assuming I was too wrapped up in work to notice her lies. But I was always watching, always waiting. Jason, on the other hand, was starting to feel the fallout from my setup. I could tell by the changes in Kate's behavior. She seemed more anxious, more distracted, like something was weighing on her mind. I didn't ask her about it. I didn't need to. I knew that Jason's wife had blown up their affair, and now they were scrambling to pick up the pieces. Then, one evening, just as I was finishing up at work, I got the message I had been waiting for. It was from the private investigator. He had dug up everything on Jason, his financial records, his business dealings, his connection to Kate. And there was one thing that stood out above all the rest. Jason had a lot more to lose than I'd initially thought. He was deep in debt, using company money to finance a lavish lifestyle that he couldn't afford, all while having an affair with my wife. It was the perfect leverage. I stared at the report for a long time, the wheels in my head turning. If I played this right, I could ruin Jason without ever lifting a finger. I had all the evidence I needed to not only expose him as a fraud, but also to take him down in a way that would leave his career in ruins. And when it all came crashing down, Kate would be caught in the crossfire. The best part? I wouldn't even have to be there to watch it happen. The next day, I made a few discreet calls. I knew a guy who worked in corporate investigations, someone who specialized in uncovering financial crimes. He owed me a favor from a case we had worked on together a few years back. I filled him in on Jason's situation, giving him just enough information to pique his interest without revealing my connection to it. He agreed to look into it, and I knew it wouldn't take long before Jason's shady dealings came to light. As I set that part of the plan into motion, I began focusing on Kate. I had let her think she was getting away with this long enough. It was time to let her feel the pressure, to make her question everything. I started by pulling back even further, coming home later, canceling plans with her, making up excuses to be out of the house. She noticed, of course, and I could see the worry in her eyes. But she didn't ask me about it. Maybe she was afraid of what I might say. Then I started dropping subtle hints, leaving my phone unlocked with text messages that looked like they were from someone else, staying out late without explanation, being vague about my whereabouts. It didn't take long for Kate to start getting suspicious. I could see it in the way she looked at me, the way she checked my phone when she thought I wasn't watching. She was starting to feel what I had felt, the uncertainty, the doubt, the fear that something was happening right under her nose. It was exactly what I wanted. One night, after another late shift, I came home to find Kate sitting in the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and fear. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I shrugged, playing it cool. "Work." "Really?" She stood up, stepping toward me, her hands clenched into fists. "Because I called the station. They said you left hours ago." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "You're lying to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know something's going on, James. You're never home anymore. You don't talk to me. You're always somewhere else." I let the silence stretch between us, watching as the fear and confusion played across her face. She was unraveling, just like I had planned. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold and steady. "Are you really going to accuse me of lying, Kate? After everything?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw panic flicker across her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if I had found out about her affair, or if I was guilty of the same thing. I stepped closer, my gaze never leaving hers. "I know, Kate. I know everything." Her face drained of color. What are you talking about?" "I know about you and Jason," I said quietly. "I know how long it's been going on. I know where you've been meeting. I know about the messages, the hotels. I've known for a while." She looked like she was about to collapse, her knees shaking as she stumbled backward, her hand covering her mouth. "James, I can explain." "I don't need your explanations." My voice was sharp, cutting through the air between us. "I've been watching, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment. You thought you were getting away with it, didn't you? But I've been 2 steps ahead this whole time." Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to find the words, but I wasn't interested in hearing them. I had spent months in silence, biding my time, and now it was my turn to speak. "You threw everything away," I continued, my tone cold and measured. "All the years we've spent together, the trust we built. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed our marriage. And for what? For him? A man who can't even keep his own life together." Kate shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to happen. I love you, James, I do." "Don't." I cut her off. "Don't stand there and lie to me anymore. You don't get to say you love me after what you've done." She crumbled, sinking to the floor in a heap of sobs. It should have made me feel something. Sadness, maybe, or even pity. But I felt nothing. Just cold satisfaction. I stared down at her, the woman I had once loved, now broken at my feet. This was the moment I had waited for, the moment when everything I had planned finally came together. But as I looked at her, I realized something. This wasn't enough. For the next week, Kate was a shell of herself. She tried to apologize, tried to make amends, but I refused to engage. I was done. She spent her days crying, her nights locked in our bedroom, while I made plans to get out of the marriage as cleanly as possible. I wanted nothing from her, just to be rid of her and the life she had tainted. But Jason wasn't so lucky. A few days after my confrontation with Kate, the investigation into Jason's financial dealings went public. His company was rocked by the scandal, and within hours, his reputation was in tatters. He lost his job, his marriage, and soon, his home. The life he had built came crashing down around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Kate tried to contact him, of course, but he was in no position to help her. I watched as she spiraled, realizing too late that she had lost everything. She had thought she could have it all, the affair, the marriage, the double life, but now she had nothing. Kate's fall from grace was swift, but as satisfying as it was to watch her unravel, I knew I had to keep pushing. My revenge wasn't complete yet. Jason had been destroyed professionally, and his personal life was in shambles. But Kate? She was still clinging to some shred of hope that she could make things right, that she could somehow salvage our marriage. She didn't realize that I was already beyond saving us. After that night, when I told her I knew everything, she had retreated into herself. She tiptoed around the house, avoiding me most of the time but occasionally trying to reach out, hoping for some kind of resolution. I let her dangle there, let her feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her, because that was the key. The fear of the unknown was far more torturous than any immediate blow I could have dealt. Every moment, she wondered what I was thinking, what I would do next. She had no idea how deep my plans ran. I started leaving the house at odd hours, coming back even later, making sure my phone was always on silent, and never giving her any indication of where I was. Sometimes I'd return home in the middle of the night, slipping in as quietly as I had slipped out. Other times, I stayed out until dawn, leaving her lying awake, imagining every worst-case scenario. Was I with someone else? Was I building a case against her? Would I expose her affair to her family, her friends? She never asked, because she was too afraid of the answers. That's what I wanted. For her to fear that she was powerless, that her fate was entirely in my hands. One evening, after several days of this pattern, I came home and found her in the living room, sitting on the couch, a wine glass clutched in her hand. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red from crying. I barely acknowledged her as I made my way to the kitchen. I poured myself a drink, taking my time, letting her stew in the tension. Finally, she spoke, her voice small and tentative. "James, we need to talk." I leaned against the counter, looking at her from across the room. "About what?" She flinched at the coldness in my voice. "About us. About everything." I didn't respond, just sipped my drink, waiting for her to continue. She set her glass down, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her eyes filling with fresh tears. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a mistake. All of it. Jason, it wasn't real. It was stupid, and I regret it so much." I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way she was grasping at anything that might bring me back. She thought that an apology would fix this, that her tears could somehow erase months of deceit. "You regret it?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you regret it because you got caught? Or because you actually feel guilty for what you did?" "Both," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you, James. I know I destroyed everything, but I want to fix it. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I can't lose you." There was a time, months ago, when those words might have meant something to me, when I might have actually considered giving her a chance to make things right. But now, I saw through her. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry that her comfortable life was falling apart, that the man she had betrayed wasn't bending to her will, wasn't giving her an easy way out. I let her ramble on, watching her crumble before me, trying to convince me that she could be trusted again. She promised to cut all ties with Jason, to dedicate herself to repairing our marriage. But I wasn't interested in her words. "You think this is about you and Jason?" I asked, finally cutting her off. "You think that's the only thing you broke?" She looked confused, wiping at her eyes. What do you mean? I stepped closer, the anger that had been simmering for months finally bubbling to the surface. You didn't just betray me, Kate. You betrayed everything we built. The trust, the life we had. Every moment you spent with him, every lie you told. You tore apart the foundation of our marriage. I know, she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. But we can rebuild it. I love you, James. We can fix this. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mixture of rage and disgust. She didn't get it. She didn't understand that what she had done wasn't fixable. The woman I had once loved no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone I couldn't even recognize anymore. Someone selfish, deceitful, and weak. There's nothing left to fix, I said quietly, my voice cold and final. Her sobs grew louder, her whole body shaking as the realization sank in. She had lost me. She had gambled, and she had lost. I left her there, crumpled on the couch, and went upstairs to our bedroom. The same bedroom where she had brought Jason. I should have felt something, anger, sadness, even pity, but I didn't. I had become numb to her suffering. This was what I had planned all along, and now, watching her unravel like this was just another step in my revenge. But there was still one final move to make. The next day, I called our lawyer. I had been preparing for this for weeks, quietly getting my affairs in order, ensuring that the divorce would go as smoothly for me, and as painfully for her, as possible. I had made sure to protect myself financially, moving assets into accounts she couldn't touch, gathering evidence that would ensure she got as little as possible in the settlement. When I served her the divorce papers, the look on her face was everything I had hoped for. She was shocked, blindsided. I watched as she scanned the document, her hands trembling as she realized how thoroughly I had cut her out of my life. There was no room for negotiation, no chance for reconciliation. I had made sure of that. "James, please," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to do this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence spoke louder than any words could. I left the house that day, knowing I wouldn't be coming back. I had already found a new place, a fresh start. Kate could keep the house, if she wanted. It didn't matter to me anymore. Everything in that house was a reminder of the life we had once had, and the betrayal that had destroyed it. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace. My plan had worked. Kate was broken, Jason was ruined, and I had come out on top. But there was no satisfaction in it. The coldness I had felt all along was still there, lingering in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I had gotten my revenge, but it hadn't healed the wounds she had caused. It hadn't taken away the pain of betrayal. I had lost her long before I had served those papers, long before I had started plotting her downfall. And that loss, of trust, of love, of the life we had built together, was something I would carry with me long after this was over. Months passed, and Kate faded from my life. The divorce was finalized, and I moved on, or at least I tried to. But every once in a while, I'd hear about her through mutual friends. She wasn't doing well. She had tried to reach out to me a few times, leaving voicemails I never bothered to listen to, sending texts that I ignored. I had no desire to reopen that wound. I had done what I needed to do, and now it was time to let go. Jason, on the other hand, was a different story. His career had been utterly destroyed, and from what I had heard, his wife had left him, taking the kids and most of his assets with her. He had tried to rebuild his life, but every attempt had been met with failure. It was poetic in a way. He had thought he could take what wasn't his and get away with it, but in the end, he had lost everything. One night, as I sat in my new apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey, I found myself thinking about Kate, not with anger or bitterness, but with a strange sense of detachment. I had loved her once, truly loved her, and for a long time, that love had defined me. But now she was just someone I used to know, a ghost from a life that no longer existed. I drained my glass and set it down, staring out the window at the city below. Revenge had been sweet, yes, but it hadn't brought me closure. It hadn't filled the emptiness that betrayal had left behind. But maybe that was okay. Maybe, in the end, all I needed was to move forward, to leave the past where it belonged and start living for myself again. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months, and headed for the door. It was time to move on. Time to find out who I was without her. Time to start over. And this time, I would do it on my own terms. The weight of everything that had happened hung over me as I stepped out of my apartment into the cool night air. It was strange. After all the careful planning, all the meticulous steps I had taken to get my revenge, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. In fact, I felt empty. It was an unsettling feeling, but I couldn't deny that it was there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I had spent so much time focused on getting back at Kate and Jason that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next. Now that it was over, now that they were both broken in ways they could never repair, I was left with the aftermath, the silence, the void. But as I walked through the streets, I realized that maybe this was my chance to rebuild, to figure out who I was without Kate, without the anger and betrayal that had fueled me for so long. It was time to leave the past behind. I had to, or else I would never be free of it. A few weeks passed, and I settled into my new life. The divorce was officially behind me, the papers signed and filed. I had distanced myself from most of the people who reminded me of my old life, choosing instead to focus on new routines, new habits, new people. I threw myself into my work at the precinct, taking on extra cases, working longer hours, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to the chaos I had left behind. One evening, while sitting at my desk, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, my stomach tightening when I saw Kate's name flash across it. She hadn't tried to contact me in a while, and part of me had hoped that she had finally accepted that it was over. But there it was, a message. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. It was short, just a few words. "I'm sorry. I hope you're okay." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. I should have felt anger, or resentment, or something, but I didn't. I felt nothing, just a hollow kind of acceptance. I didn't need to respond. There was nothing left to say. I deleted the message and turned my attention back to the case in front of me, knowing that whatever Kate was going through wasn't my problem anymore. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself adjusting to a new normal. The apartment felt more like home now, and I had started to make new friends, mostly coworkers, some people from the gym, a few neighbors who were surprisingly welcoming. The city that had once felt so cold and unfamiliar was starting to warm up again, and I was beginning to feel like I had a place in it. There were still moments when the past crept up on me, flashes of memories with Kate, the life we had built, the good times that had been buried beneath the weight of her betrayal. But those moments were fleeting, and each time they came, they were a little less painful. I had learned to live with them, to accept them as part of my story, but not the whole of it. One night, after a long shift, I found myself sitting in the quiet of my apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand. The world outside was still, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I had spent so long chasing revenge, so long trying to right the wrongs that had been done to me, but now I realized that what I really needed wasn't vengeance. It was closure, and I had found it. Not in the destruction of Kate's life, not in the collapse of Jason's career, but in the realization that I had the power to walk away from all of it, to let it go. As I sat there, the weight that had been pressing on my chest for months seemed to lift. I wasn't the man I had been before all of this, before Kate's betrayal, before my carefully orchestrated revenge, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe I was someone stronger now, someone who knew his own worth, someone who could rebuild, no matter how many times life tried to tear him down. I finished my drink and stood, looking out the window at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. It was time to move forward. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. I went about my day, the routine of work and life keeping me grounded, but there was a new energy in me now. It wasn't the same cold, calculated focus I'd had during those months of planning my revenge. It was something warmer. Hope, maybe. Optimism. The cases at the precinct kept me busy, but I found that I wasn't just burying myself in work anymore. I was connecting with people again, rebuilding relationships I had neglected during my time with Kate. My coworkers noticed the change, too. There were fewer late nights, fewer excuses to avoid social events. I had been isolating myself for too long, and now I was ready to let people back in. One of those people was Emily, a detective who had been at the precinct for about a year. We hadn't interacted much before, mostly because I'd been too caught up in my own drama to pay attention, but lately, we had started talking more. She was sharp, funny, and had a no-nonsense attitude that I respected. Over time, our conversations became more frequent, and one evening, after a particularly tough case, we found ourselves grabbing a drink together. At first, it was just about work, trading war stories from the field, but as the night went on, the conversation shifted. We talked about life outside of the precinct, about family, about past relationships, about the future. She told me about her own divorce, how she had been through something similar, and it was strangely comforting to know that someone else understood the kind of pain I had been through. As the night wore on, I realized that I was genuinely enjoying her company, not just as a distraction, but as something more. It felt good to laugh again, to talk with someone who didn't carry the weight of my past. By the time we left the bar, it was late, and we stood outside, the cool breeze cutting through the night air. There was a moment of silence between us, the kind of comfortable silence that didn't need to be filled with words. And then, she smiled at me, an easy, genuine smile that made something inside me shift. "Thanks for tonight," she said, tucking her hands into her pockets. "I needed that." "Yeah," I replied, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. "Me too." We said our goodbyes, and as I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was starting to heal. I wasn't sure where things with Emily would go, if anywhere, but it didn't matter. The point was that I was open to the possibility, open to moving on. Over the next few months, life began to fall into place. The shadows of my past, while still present, had started to fade, replaced by new memories, new experiences. Emily and I continued to see each other, slowly at first, neither of us wanting to rush into anything. But there was an ease between us that felt natural, unforced. It wasn't a rebound, and it wasn't about filling the void Kate had left behind. It was something real, something that grew out of mutual respect and understanding. One evening, as we sat together on my balcony, watching the sunset, I realized just how far I had come. The man who had been consumed by anger and revenge was gone. In his place was someone who had learned to let go, to accept that life wasn't always fair, but that didn't mean it couldn't be good again. "I never thought I'd be here," I said quietly, more to myself than to Emily. "Where's that?" she asked, glancing over at me. "Happy," I admitted. "I never thought I'd feel happy again." She smiled, her hand resting lightly on mine. "You deserve it." Maybe I did. Maybe, after everything I had been through, after all the heartache and betrayal, I had finally earned the right to be happy again. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, I knew that I had. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever came next. Because in the end, life wasn't about the betrayals or the pain. It was about how you moved forward from them, how you rebuilt, piece by piece, until you found yourself again. And I had finally found myself. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.